Hi everybody, welcome to Live Blogger. I have combined all the videos in our Recipe Finder app development series into a single long video so that it's easy for you to follow. Now in this video we are basically going to create this app from scratch using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Here we can see that we have this home page, and we can click on this Get Random Recipe button, and we will have a random recipe displayed over here, and we can open this and check out the details. And you can also search for anything over here, and you will find the recipes related to that search term. So this is what we're going to build from scratch using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And in the end I will also show you how to add this to your Blogger website, and I will also leave the link of the source code in the description of this video. So let's get started. Now this is the demo video of this application, and I'll just show you how this works. So we can see that we have this page over here, and we have this search box where we can add any search term, and then we have the search button over here, and if I type something and search, we will get the recipes over here. And if we don't have a recipe, then it will have this message displayed over here, no recipes found. And we also have this button called Get Random Recipe, and you can click on it and get a random recipe over here. So here we can see that this recipe is being displayed over here. If I click on that, we have this pop-up, and we have all the details. We have the category and the area. We have the ingredients displayed over here. We also have the instruction, and then we also have this link to watch on YouTube, and it will show you a detailed instruction on how we can make this. And then we have this close icon, and we can close this pop-up. Now if I search for something over here, like if I just type carrot and press search, we can see that all the recipes for carrot are displayed over here, and we can go ahead and open any of these, and we will have the instructions of that displayed over here. We also have the link to watch on YouTube, and we also have the link to the original source. So if I click on that, we have the original source displayed over here. So this is how this application works. We'll be using an API to get all this data. Right, here I have created a folder called Recipe Finder, and I just opened it with VS Code. Now let's create the necessary files. So let's create a new file called index.html. Let's create one more file called style.css, and let's create one more file called main.js. Right, let's start with the index.html file, and in VS Code you can just type exclamation and press tab, and you'll have this basic HTML5 code. Now here for the title, I'll just type Recipe Finder. And let's link our CSS file over here. So let's type link and press tab, and here in the href let's type style.css. Now here in the body let's link our JavaScript file. So let's type script :src and press tab, and here in the src let's type main.js. Now the first thing we will do is we will get the fonts. So here we are using a font called Poppins. So let's get the font from Google Fonts. Alright, so here I'm in fonts.google.com, and let's search for Poppins, and let's select this font. Now let's go ahead and select the styles that we need. So first of all, let's go ahead and click on Get Font, and here let's click on Get Embed Code, and here I'll just change styles, and let's remove all of these, and let's select the ones that we need. So we'll just select light, we will have regular, and then we'll also have semi-bold and also bold. So now let's go ahead and copy this link from here. So let's copy code, and let's go to our HTML file. Let's paste the link over here. All right, now let's go ahead and create the markup of our design. So the first thing we will do is we'll create a container division. So let's give it a class of recipe container or recipe finder container. Let's name it that. And here the first thing we need to have is an h1, and we need to have this text recipe finder in here. And the next thing we need to have is this search input field. So for that, let's create a form element, and I'll just remove the action for now. And in this form we need to have an input field with the type of text, and let's give it an ID of search input, and let's add a placeholder, and let's type search by name. Let's add an example. I'll just type carrot, and we'll also make it required. And let's open this in our browser and let's see how it looks. So I have this extension called Live Server installed in VS Code. So once you have this extension installed, you can just right click over here in the HTML file and click on Open with Live Server. And here we can see our heading and the search input field are displayed over here. Now we need to have a button. So let's go outside the input field and let's create a button. And here let's type search. And in the button, we need to have an attribute called type, and we need to set it to submit. And let's also give it an ID of search button. Alright, after the search button, we need to have this get random recipe button. So let's go outside the form and here let's go ahead and create a division with the class of random button container. And here we'll just create a button and let's type get random recipe over here. And in the button we'll just have an ID and let's set it to random button. And let's also give it a class. Let's type random button. And then we will have an area over here where we will display some message. So we need to have a division for that. Let's go over here and let's create a division with the class of message. Let's also give it an ID of message area. And we'll just leave it blank. And then the next thing we need to do is when we type something over here and when we display these recipes, we need to have all of them displayed inside this grid-like structure. And this is also responsive. So if I decrease the width of the browser window, this is how it looks. So let's create a container division for this. Let's go ahead and here, let's create a division with the class of results grid. And I will just give it an ID of results grid as well. And in this division, we will have all the recipe items. So let's create a division with the class of recipe item. And in this, we need to have an image. So let's type img. And in the source, I'll just go ahead and copy the source of this image. So I'll just click on copy image address and let's paste it over here. And in the alt, I'll just copy this and paste it over here. And after the image, we need to have a heading. So let's create an S3 and let's add the heading over here. So this is basically how the result item looks. I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this 2 more times. Alright, now the next thing we need to do is we need to write the HTML for this pop-up. So when I click on any of these, we can see that we have this pop-up displayed over here. Now for this pop-up, let's go ahead and create a container division. And let's give it a class of model container. And by default, we'll just have it hidden. So we'll also add a class of hidden. And let's add an ID of recipe model. So here we can see we have this division with a class of model container and also hidden. And when we want to display this, we'll just remove the hidden class and we will style all of that in the CSS. And we'll remove and add the classes using JavaScript. So here in this division, the first thing we will have is a division with the class of model content. And in this model content, we need to have a close button over here at the top. So for that, let's go ahead and create a button. And let's give it an ID of model close button. And let's give it a class of model close button. And here we'll just type plus and we'll rotate it a little bit and make it look like the close button. And after this button, we need to have the recipe content. So we have all the details over here. So for that, let's create a division and let's give it an ID of recipe details content. And here all the details will be loaded from the JavaScript. But for now, let's go ahead and add some content so that we have something to work with in the CSS. So let's add an h2 and let's go ahead and paste this heading. And then we'll have an img tag, and in the source, let's add this source right here. So let's copy image address and paste it over here. And in the alt, let's go ahead and copy and paste this heading. And after the image, we need to have these details. So we'll create S3s for all of this. So I'll just create an S3. And let's copy this and paste it over here. I'll just duplicate this 2 more times. And then we need to have all of these details. So for that, we'll create an unordered list, and we'll have list items in that. And let's copy a couple of these. And after that, we need to have the instructions. So let's copy this, and let's create an S3, and let's paste it over here. And after that, we need to have all these instructions. So I'll just copy this, and let's create a paragraph tag and paste it over here. And then we need to have another S3 for this heading. So let's copy this, let's create an S3 and paste it over here. Now here we will have the link of the recipe. So for that, let's create a division with the class of video wrapper, and let's create an anchor tag. And in the sref, I'll just copy the link address and paste it over here. And we need to open this in a new tab. So let's type target underscore blank, and here let's type watch on YouTube. Now the next thing we need to have is this view original source link. So let's create a division with the class of source wrapper, and let's create an anchor tag. And here I'll just type view original source, and here also we want to have it opened in a new tab. So let's type target blank, and with that we have completed writing the HTML of our application. So if you go back to our website, this is how it looks. We have all the elements displayed over here. Right, here is my source code, and here we have already linked our CSS file. So let's go to our style.css file, and let's start writing our CSS. So the first thing we will do is we'll select everything, and here we'll just reset the margin and the padding, and we'll also set the box sizing to border box so that we have the correct height and width for all the elements. And then let's go ahead and select the body, and let's add some styles to this as well. So for the body, we'll just add a font family, and we'll just set it to the Poppins font, because here we can see that we have added the link of the Poppins font over here in the HTML. So let's type Poppins over here, and sans serif as the backup font. And let's set the line height of all the text to 1.7, and we'll set the padding to 30 pixels top and bottom, and 15 pixels left and right. And this is how it looks. We can see that the font has changed. Now let's go ahead and set a background color. So let's tap background, and let's set the background color to a light color. So we'll just go ahead and create a variable for this. So we can just go ahead and create a root selector, and here we'll just go ahead and create a variable called light bg, and let's set it to hash f8 f9 fa, and let's add the variable over here. So let's type var light bg. And now we can see that we have the correct background color displayed over here. Let's also add a color for the dark text. So let's type -- text dark, and let's set the color to hash 343A40. And here let's go ahead and type color, and let's set it to var dark text color. Alright, now let's go ahead and target the main container division, which is this division with the class of recipe finder container. So let's type dot recipe finder container, and here let's set the max width to 1200 pixels, and let's set the padding to 0 top and bottom, and 15 pixels left and right. And let's type text align to the center, and now we can see that everything is displayed in the center. Alright, now let's target this h1. So here we can see inside the HTML file we have this h1 for the heading. So let's type h1, and here let's type font size, and let's set it to 2.5 rem, and let's set the font weight to 700, and let's go over here. Let's see whether we have the 700. So we can see that we have this 700 weight over here, and let's add a margin bottom of 30 pixels, and let's set the letter spacing to -1 pixel. The letter spacing is basically the gap between these characters inside our text. Alright, now let's style this search input field and also this search button. So if you go to the HTML file, here we can see that we have this form, and in that we have the input field and the button. Now for the form, let's add an ID and a class. So let's type ID equals search form, and let's add a class of search box, and let's target this search box over here. So let's go back over here to the style.css file and let's type search box. Let's set the display to flex, and let's type justify content center. We'll also type align items to the center so that they are centered vertically as well. And let's add a margin bottom. So let's type margin bottom, and let's set it to 40 pixels. Let's add a max width. So let's type max width, and let's set it to 600 pixels. Let's also add a box shadow, and let's set the values to 0, 4 pixels, 15 pixels. And for the shadow color, let's type RGBA 0, 0, 0 and 0.8. So this is the shadow. Let's also add rounded corners. So let's type border radius, and let's set it to 8 pixels. And now let's target this input field inside the form. So let's go ahead and target this. We have an ID of search input. Let's type search input, and let's add a padding of 15 pixels top and bottom, 20 pixels left and right. Let's set the font size to 1 rem, and let's set the flex grow to 1 so that it takes up all the space that it can. Let's also set the border to 1 pixel solid, and for the color let's type E9 ECEF. Now let's also add border radius for rounded corners. Now we want to have the rounded corners for the left side, so we need to have it for top left and bottom left. So for that, let's go ahead and type border radius. Let's set the value to 8 pixels, 0, 0 and 8 pixels. So this 8 pixels is for top left, this is for top right, and this is for bottom right, and this is for bottom left. Now we can see that we have the border radius for the left side, and when we click on this, we can see that we have this blue outline. So let's remove that. I'll just type outline none. Now if we click on this, we don't have the outline. Now when we focus on this input field, we need to have this green color over here. So for that, let's go back and let's type search input colon focus, and let's type border color. And for this, let's create a variable, and let's create a variable called primary color, and let's set the value to 4CA F50. And let's use this variable over here. So let's type border color var primary color. So now when we focus on this input field, we have this border color. Let's also add a smooth transition. So here for the search input, let's type transition border color 0.3 seconds ease. So now we have the smooth transition. Right now let's style this search button. So for the search button, we have this button with an ID of search button. So here let's type search button, and let's set the padding to 15 pixels top and bottom, 25 pixels left and right. Let's set the font size to 1 rem. Let's set the font weight to 600, and it has a different font. So let's change the font family. Let's type font family, and let's set it to Poppins and sans serif. Now we have the correct font. Right now let's go ahead and set the background color for this button. So let's type background color, and let's set it to var primary color, and let's set the color of the text to white, and we'll just remove the border. Now here for the button, we need to have the border radius for the right side. So let's type border radius 0, 8 pixels, 8 pixels and 0. Now let's also bring this to the center. So for the search box, let's also type margin inline auto. So it will set the left and the right margins to auto. And I think we can decrease the padding top and bottom of this button a little bit. So here for the button, let's type 12 pixels for the padding top and bottom, or let's try 14 pixels. And I think that looks all right. Now when you hover over this, we need to have the pointer in the button. So for the search button, let's also type cursor to pointer. And let's also add a hover effect to this. So let's type search button colon hover, and let's set the background color to a darker color of primary color. So here let's add one more variable called primary dark, and let's set the color to 45A049, and let's add that over here. So let's type var primary dark, and let's also add a smooth transition. So let's type transition background color 0.3 seconds ease, and let's go back, and now we can see we have this hover effect. Let's go back and let's change the padding to 13 pixels. Let's see how it looks, and I think that looks alright. Now let's also style this get random recipe button. So we need to make it look like this. So for that, let's go back over here and let's go to the index.html file, and we have this division with the class of random button container, and in that we have this class of random button for the button. So let's go ahead and target the button. I'll just type dot random button. Let's set the padding to 10 pixels and 25 pixels. Let's set the font size to 0.95 rem. Let's set the font weight to 600, and let's set the font family to Poppins and sans serif. Let's set the background color to FF9800, and let's remove the border. So I'll just have border none. Let's set the color of the text to white. Let's also add a border radius, and let's set it to 8 pixels, and let's set the cursor to pointer. Let's also add some hover effect to this get random recipe button. So here I'll just type transition, and we will have it for background color 0.3 seconds ease, and let's also add it for transform 0.2 seconds ease, and we'll also add a box shadow. So let's type box shadow. Let's set the values to 0, 2 pixels, 8 pixels RGBA, 0, 0, 0 and 0.1, and let's type random button colon hover. Let's set the background color to hash F57C00, and let's type transform translate Y of -2 pixels. So now when you hover over this, we can see that we have this hover effect. Let's remove the gap a little bit between this search input field and this get random recipe button. So I think we have added some margin bottom for this search box. So here let's change this to, let's try 20, or let's try 28 pixels, and I think that looks alright. So with that, we have styled the header section of our app. Right, here's my source code, and let's scroll down and let's start writing the code for this results grid. Now we want it to be displayed a number of results in a row. So for that, we will use a display of grid. Let's go back and let's go to the index.html file. And here we can see for the results grid, we have this division with the class of results grid. So let's target that. I'll just type results grid, and let's set the display to grid, and let's type grid template columns, and let's set it to repeat auto fit min max 240 pixels and 1 FR. Now this basically makes it responsive. So if you go back here, we can see that all these items are displayed one next to the other, and if I decrease the width of the browser window, we can see that now we have just 3 of these items displayed, and now we have 2 items displayed. So in this way, this is completely responsive. Now let's go ahead and add some gap between these items. So let's go back over here and let's type gap of, let's try 25 pixels. Let's also add a margin top. So let's type margin top of 30 pixels. And this looks alright. Now let's target all the images inside these recipe items, and let's add a width to it. So let's go back over here, and here we can see we have this img inside the recipe item. So let's target that. I'll just type recipe item img, and let's set the width to 100%. So this is how it looks. Now we can see that it is all shifted to the left side a little bit. So if I zoom out, we can see that our whole app is shifted to the left side. So let's bring everything to the center. Let's go back over here to the CSS and let's scroll up. And here for the recipe finder container, let's add margin inline to auto. So it will set the left and the right margins to auto. And now we can see that it is in the center. Alright, so now if we go ahead and reduce the width of the browser window, this is how it looks. We can see that it is completely responsive. Right now, let's go ahead and style these recipe item divisions. So here we can see inside the results grid, we have the recipe item. In that we have the image and the S3. So let's go ahead and target the recipe item. Let's tap recipe item. And let's add a background color of white. Let's also add a border radius for rounded corners. So let's tap border radius of, let's try 8 pixels. So here we can see we have this border radius, and let's also add a box shadow. And let's set the values to 0, 4 pixels, 10 pixels, RGBA, 0, 0, 0, and 0.1. And this is how it looks. Now let's set the text align to left for this text inside the recipe item. So let's tap text align left. So this is how it looks. Now let's also add some padding to this text. So let's target the S3 inside the recipe item. So let's tap recipe item S3, and we'll set the font size to 1.15 rem, and let's set the font weight to 600, and let's set the padding to 15 pixels. And let's remove the default margin. So let's tap margin of 0. Now for the image, let's also add a height. So here let's tap height, and let's set it to 220 pixels. And let's also type object fit to cover so that it has the correct proportions. Right now in the recipe item, let's set the display to flex, and we'll set the flex direction to column. And now we can see we have the correct spacing between the elements. Right now let's set the cursor to pointer. So let's tap cursor pointer. And let's also set the width to 100%. So if it has the space, then it will take up the whole width. Now when we hover over this, we need to have a little bit of hover effect. So for that, let's type recipe item :hover, and here let's tap transform, translate Y, and let's set it to -5 pixels. So we'll just move it up a little bit. And let's tap box shadow, and let's set the value to 0, 8 pixels, 20 pixels, RGBA 0, 0, 0, and 0.12. And let's also have a smooth transition. So here let's tap transition, and let's set it to all 0.25 seconds ease in out. So this is how it looks. Right now let's style this model. So when we click on any of these, we should have a model displayed over here, and in that we need to display the details of this recipe. So let's go back and let's go to the index.html file, and for the model we have this division of the class of model container, and by default we have set a class of hidden to this as well. So here let's go ahead and type model container, and let's set the position to fixed, and let's set the inset to 0 so that the values of left, right, top and bottom are set to 0. So it will take up the whole screen. And let's set the background color to RGBA 0, 0, 0, and for the opacity we'll just tap 0.6. So it will have a slightly darker overlay. Right now let's set the display to flex, align items to the center and justify content to the center. So it will be centered vertically and horizontally. Let's also add a Z index so that it will be above all the other elements. So let's set it to 1000. Now let's set the opacity to 1, and we'll also set the visibility to visible so that it is clickable. And if we have a class of hidden, so let's tap model container hidden, then we'll set the opacity to 0 and the visibility to hidden. So now we can see that the pop-up is not being displayed, but if we remove the hidden class from here, then we can see that the pop-up is displayed. Let's also add a backdrop blur. So here let's type backdrop filter, and let's set it to blur 3 pixels. So now we can see that the background is blurred a little bit. Let's also add some padding so that it will look good on smaller screens. Right now let's target the division inside the model container, which is called model content. So let's add some styles to this. Let's type model content, And let's tap background color and let's set it to white. Let's add a maximum width of 800 pixels. And let's also add a maximum height, and let's set it to 90 viewport height. And now we should be able to scroll up and down inside this pop-up. So let's tap overflow Y of auto. Now we can see we are able to scroll up and down. Let's also add a box shadow. So let's tap box shadow and let's set the values to 0, 10 pixels, 30 pixels RGBA, 0, 0, 0 and 0.15. Let's also add a border radius for rounded corners. So let's tap border radius and let's set the value to 8 pixels. And let's also add a padding of 35 pixels top and bottom, 40 pixels left and right. Right now let's style this close button and we need to bring it to the right side over here. So for that we need to set the position of this container division, which is model content, to relative. So let's tap position relative and here let's type model content, and in that we have this close button and it has this class of model close button. So let's type model close button and we'll set the position to absolute, and it will be positioned relative to this model content. And let's set the top value to 15 pixels and let's set the right value to 15 pixels as well. Right now let's add a background color and let's set it to F8, F9, FA. I think we already created this variable, so let's use this light BG. So let's have var light BG and let's add a border of 1 pixel solid E9 ECEF, which is a light gray color. Right now let's set the border radius to 50% so that we have round shape, and let's set the same height and width values. So let's tap height of 35 pixels and width of 35 pixels. Let's set the display to flex, align items to the center and justify content to the center. Let's also set the font size to 2 rems. Let's set the cursor to pointer, and this is how it looks. It doesn't have the correct round shape for now. So let's go back and let's see what's the problem. So here for the width we need to also add pixels, and now we can see we have the correct round shape. Let's also set the color of this icon. So let's tap color and let's set the value to 6C757D, and we need to rotate it a little bit to make it look like the close icon. So let's tap transform, rotate, and let's set it to 45 degrees. So now this looks like a close button. Now when we hover over this we need to have a little bit of hover effect. So let's type model content model close button colon hover, and let's type transform, rotate, and let's set it to 135 degrees. And let's also change the color to a darker color, 343A40. So I think we already have that variable. So we have text dark. So let's have var text dark, and let's set the background color to E2, E6, EA, and this is how it looks. Let's also add a smooth transition so that we can see the rotation. So let's tap transition and let's set it to all 0.2 seconds ease, and this is how it looks. Right now let's style the other elements inside this model. So first of all we have this heading. So if you go back to the HTML file, we have this division with an ID of recipe details content, and in that we have the h2. So let's type hash recipe details content h2. Let's set the font size to 1.8 rem. Let's set the font weight to 700. Let's add a margin bottom of 20 pixels, and let's set the color of the text to var primary color. Right now let's style this image. So let's type hash recipe details content img. Here let's set the width to 100%, and let's add a border radius of 8 pixels, and we'll also add a box shadow. So let's type box shadow. Let's set the values to 0, 4 pixels, 10 pixels RGBA, and let's set the value to 0, 0, 0 and 0.1. Right now let's style these S3s. So here we can see we have S3 for these headings. Let's go back and let's type recipe details content, and let's type S3. Let's set the font size to 1.2 rem. Let's set the font weight to 600, and let's add a margin top of 25 pixels. Let's add a margin bottom of 10 pixels, and we need to add a border bottom. So let's type border bottom of 2 pixel solid, and let's add the primary color as the border color, and let's also add some padding bottom. So let's type padding bottom, and let's set the value to 8 pixels, and this is how it looks. And then we have the list. So let's style this. Let's go back, and here we have this UL. Inside that we have the LIs. So let's type recipe details content UL, and let's remove the bullet. So let's type list style of none, and let's type padding left of 0. Let's add a margin bottom of 25 pixels. Right now let's style these list items. So let's type recipe details content ULLI. Let's add a padding of 8 pixels and 0. So 8 pixels top and bottom, 0 for left and right. Let's add a border bottom of 1 pixel dashed, and for the border color let's add the same color over here. So let's copy this, and let's paste it over here. So this is how it looks. Let's set the font size to 0.95 rem. Now we'll just remove the border from the last list item. So let's type hash recipe details content ULLI colon last child, and here let's type border bottom, and let's set it to none. So for the last one we don't have the border. Right now let's style this paragraph. So let's type recipe details content P, and let's set the line height to 1.8. Let's set the font size to 1 rem. Right now let's style these links. So let's type recipe details content A, and let's set the color of the text to var primary color. Let's remove the underline. So let's type text decoration none, and let's set the font weight to 600. Now let's also add a hover effect. So let's type recipe details content A colon hover. Let's set the color to var dark primary color, and let's set the text decoration to underline. So now when you hover with this, we have the underline. Now let's add a margin top for these links. So here we have this video wrapper. So let's target the video wrapper. I just type hash recipe details content video wrapper, and let's add a margin top of 15 pixels. Let's add some margin bottom as well. Let's see how it looks. We can decrease the margin a little. Let's type 8 pixels, and that looks alright. So with that we have styled the model and also the results grid of our application. Right here we can see that the pop-up is being displayed. So let's go back to our HTML file, and here let's add a class called hidden, because in our CSS we had this selector where if we have model container and also hidden, then the opacity will be set to 0. So let's go back over here and let's add a class of hidden over here, and now we can see that the pop-up is hidden. Right now let's go ahead and remove all of this from here, and we will generate all of these using JavaScript from the API. So this is the markup for the results grid. So I'll just delete all of this except the first one, so that we can have a reference of the HTML structure. And let's go ahead and comment this out. So now we can see that nothing is being displayed over here. Now let's also display a message right here at the beginning. So here we have this division with the class of message, and here let's add this text. I'll just type search for a recipe or get a random one. So now if you go back here, we can see that we have the message being displayed over here. Let's also add some styles to the message. So we have this division with the class of message. Let's go to our style.css file, and here let's type dot message. Let's add a margin of 25 pixels top and bottom, and auto for left and right. And We'll also have different states for this message. So for example, if we are searching for something and if I press on this search button, we will have a message being displayed that we are fetching the recipe, and for that we need to have a different styling. So here let's type message dot and let's add error. So if you have an error, then it will display this styling. So we'll set the color to DC3545 and we'll set the background color to F8D7DA, and we'll add a border of 1 pixel solid F5C6CB. And now if you go over here to our index.html file, and let's also add a class called error. And now we can see if you have an error, then this will be the styling. Let's also add some max width over here. So let's go to the message and let's also add a padding of 10 pixels and let's add a max width of 600 pixels. And let's set the font size to 1 rem. Let's also add a border radius for rounded corners. Let's set it to 8 pixels. And this is how it looks. Let's go back over here and we will have one more class called info or loading. So let's go ahead and write the styles for info. So let's type dot message dot info. We'll also have a class called loading. So let's type message dot loading. And here let's set the color to 17A2B8. And let's set the background color to D1 ECF1. And let's set the border to 1 pixel solid BEE 5EB. So this is the info, and even for the loading we will have the same styling. And if you don't have any of these styles, we just have message, then this is what the style will look like. Right, now let's start with the functionality of this app. So the API that we're going to use is called TheMealDB. So you can just search for TheMealDB and you'll find this website called TheMealDB.com. So let's open this. Now this is a free API for meal, and we can search for the meals and we can also get the recipe of each of these meals. We can also get a random one. So there are different endpoints for this API and we'll take a look at all of that. First of all, we need to get the endpoint for search. So if you go over here to API and if you scroll down, we can see that we have the search meal by name over here. And then we have search meals by first letter. So you can use any of these API endpoints. Now in this video we will add the functionality of this search button. So let's get this search API endpoint. So I'll just copy this from here and let's go back to our main.js file. And here first of all let's create a const and let's call it search API URL, and let's set it equal to this API endpoint, and we'll just remove the search term from here and we will add this using the data that we get inside this input field. Right, now the next thing we need to do is we need to reference some of these elements from the HTML to our JavaScript. We need to reference this search input field and also the search form, and then we also need to reference this results grid because we need to add these HTML content dynamically using JavaScript. And then we also need to reference the message area, which is this one right here. So let's reference all of these. Let's go back over here and let's type const search form equals document.getElementById. And for the search form, let's see what is the ID. So here we can see for the search form we have this ID of search form, and then for the input field we have this ID of search input. So let's type search form over here, and here let's type const search input equals document.getElementById, and let's type search input. And then we need to get the results grid. So here we have the results grid. We have this ID of results grid. So let's type const results grid equals document.getElementById results grid. And then we need to reference this message area. So we have this ID of message area. Let's type const message area equals document.getElementById, and let's type message area over here. Right, now the first thing we need to do is we need to get the data from this input field. So let's add an event listener for this search form. So let's type search form dot add event listener, and let's listen for the submit event, and we get some data from here. So let's call it E. And the first thing we need to do is we need to prevent the default behavior, which is the submission of the form. So we need to do everything inside the JavaScript. So let's type E dot prevent default. And the next thing we need to do is we need to get the search term. So let's type const search term equals, and we have the search input over here, so let's type search input dot value, and we'll also remove any extra spaces, so let's type trim. So this will give us the value of this input field. I'll just console.log it over here, search term, and let's open the console, and let's type for something over here. So for example, if I type fish and if I click on search, we have the search term fish displayed over here. So anything we write over here will be displayed in our console. So now let's go back over here and we'll create a function to search the recipes. So let's type if we have a search term, then we'll just go ahead and call a function called search recipes, and let's pass the search term over here. And if you don't have a search term, then we'll just go ahead and show a message. So just create a function for showing the message as well, and we'll print this message called please enter a search term. And I'll just remove this console log from here. And now let's go ahead and create the search recipes function. So let's type async because this will be an async function. We're gonna get the data from the API, so we'll just create this async function. Let's name the function, which is search recipes, and he will also get the query. So I'll just type query over here. Now let's also create this show message function. So let's type function show message, and we'll get the message over here. I'll just call it message, and we'll also have two extra arguments over here. One is called is error. So if it is an error, then we will pass true or false over here, but by default we'll set it to false. And let's also add this argument called is loading, and let's set it to false. Now here in this show message function, here we'll just pass the second argument, which is true. So it is an error. Let's create this show message function first. So we have this message area over here. So let's type message area dot text content equals message. And then if you have the error, so let's type if is error, then message area dot class list dot add, and we'll add a class called error. And here let's type if is loading, then we'll just type message area dot class list dot add loading. Right now let's go ahead and press this search button, and we have this validation by the HTML itself. But if you go ahead and remove that, so let's remove this required, and if I press search, we can see that we have this error which says please enter a search term, and we are getting this red color because we have set true for this is error over here. Right now let's continue with the search recipes function. Here first of all, let's show a message called searching for, and we will use this query over here. So we have used backticks for writing this text, so we can just type $symbol query, and we will add double quotes over here, and let's set the second argument to false because it's not an error, but we need to set the third one to true because it is loading. So let's type true over here. So now if you go ahead and type something over here, and if I press search, we can see that it says searching for query, and it should not say query, so we should add this inside curly braces. Right now if we search for something, and if I just press search, we can see that it says searching for carrot. And if I type something else over here, and if I click on search, we have the search term displayed over here. Right now let's go back, and the next thing we need to do is we need to remove everything that we have already inside the results grid. So if you already have some data inside here, then we need to remove that. So let's type results grid dot inner HTML equals blank. So this will remove everything inside this results grid. Right now let's use a try catch, and in the catch we just go ahead and show message, and let's type something went wrong, please try again, and this is an error, so let's type true for the second argument. And here inside the try, the first thing we need to do is we need to call the API. So let's type const response equals await fetch, and here let's use backticks, and let's type $symbol curly braces, and let's use this constant. So let's copy this and let's paste it over here, and here we can see that it has this s equals, and after that we need to add the search term. So here, let's go ahead and add the search term. Let's type $, curly braces. And we have the search term over here called query. So let's type query over here. Now let's go ahead and check whether the response is okay. So let's type if exclamation response dot okay. So if it is not okay, then we'll just go ahead and throw a new error. And here let's type network error. But now if we have the response, then we'll just go ahead and get the JSON data. So let's type const data equals await response dot JSON. And let's also console.log the data. So let's type data over here. And let's also create one more function to clear the messages. So let's type function clear message. And let's type message area dot text content equals blank, and message area dot class name equals message. So we'll just have this message class. We'll remove the error and loading classes. So let's go ahead and call that over here. So let's type clear message. And now let's go back and let's see whether we get the data over here. So let's search for milk and let's click on search. And here we are getting this 404 error because we are not going to the correct URL of the API. So here we can see that it goes to our current URL, and after that it adds this www.themealdb.com. So for that, what we can do is here in the search API URL, we can just type https://. Now this will go to the correct API. So let's go back and let's search for something. Let's try milk and press search. And now we can see that we have this meals data returned over here. And if I open this, we have meals. And in the meals, we have one data. So it is displayed over here. And we have all the data of that recipe displayed right here. Let's search for something else. Let's search for carrot. And now we can see that there are 5 results. So here we get everything inside the meals array, and in that we have all these different recipes. So now that we are getting the data correctly, let's go ahead and add this to our UI. So let's go back and here let's go ahead and type if data dot meals. So if we have the meals inside the data, then we'll just go ahead and display the recipes. So we'll just create a function for that. I'll just call it display recipe or display recipes, and here let's pass the data dot meals. And if you don't have that, then we'll just go ahead and write an else. And here let's type show message, and we'll just type no recipes found for, and we'll just display the query. So I'll just add this inside backticks, and here let's type $, curly braces, query, and I'll just add it inside double quotes. Right now let's go ahead and search for something that is not available inside the API for the recipe. So I'll just search for something random, and if I click on search, we can see that it says no recipes found for this search term. Right now let's go ahead and create this function called display recipes. So let's type function display recipes, and we'll get the recipes over here. So let's type recipes, and first of all let's check whether we have the recipes. So let's type exclamation recipes or recipes dot length, and if it is equal to 0. So if there are no recipes, or if the length of the recipes is 0, then we'll just go ahead and show a message which says no recipes to display, and let's return. And now let's go ahead and loop through all these recipes if we have the recipes. So let's type recipes dot for each, and I'll just call each of the recipes recipe. Let's create an arrow function, and we need to create a div for each of these recipes with the class of recipe item. So let's type const recipe div equals document dot create element, and let's create a div, and we need to give it a class of recipe item because that is how we structured our HTML. So let's type recipe div dot class list dot add, and let's type recipe item. Right now let's go ahead and type recipe div dot inner HTML, and let's add backticks over here. And here first of all we need to have an image, and then we need to have the S3. So let's type img src, and we need to set the search to $, curly braces, and let's type recipe. And let's go back to our website and let's see how it is structured. So let's type carrot search, and here we have the meals, and we are passing the meals. And in that, for the image, let's see how it is structured. So for the image we have str meal thumb, so this is for the thumbnail, So let's go ahead and access this str meal thumb. So let's type recipe.str meal thumb, and for the alt, let's go ahead and type recipe dot, and if you go ahead and take a look at this, we have the name of the recipe, which is str meal. So let's type str meal over here. This will be the alt, and let's also type loading lazy. So this will lazy load the image, and let's close the image tag over here. And then we need to have the s3, so let's create an s3 tag, and here we need to just display the name of the recipe. So it is recipe.str meal, and let's close the s3 over here. And the last thing we need to do is we need to append this to this results grid. So let's go ahead and type results grid dot append child. Let's type recipe div. So now let's go ahead and check whether the recipes are displayed inside the UI. So let's search for carrot, and here we can see that the carrot recipes are being displayed over here. Let's search for something else. Let's search for fish, and we have the recipes for fish displayed over here. So everything is working all right. So with that, we have completed the search functionality for our app. Right, here's my source code, and for the random recipe, we need to get another endpoint from this API. So we are using this API called TheMealDB.com. So let's go back to the API website, and if you scroll down here, we can see that we have an endpoint for the random meal. So let's get this endpoint. So I'll just copy this, and let's create one more const over here, and let's name it random API URL. And let's set it equal to https:// and let's paste this link over here. Right, now the next thing we need to do is we need to reference this random recipe button. So if you go to the HTML file, and here we can see that we have this button called random btn. So let's reference this in our JavaScript file. So here I'll just type const random button equals document.getElement by id, and here let's type random button. Right, now let's add an event listener to the random button. So here let's type random button.add event listener, and let's listen for the click event, and we'll call a function called get random recipe, and let's create the function over here. So let's type function get random recipe, and let's write the code for the function. Now this function should be an async function because we're going to use await. So let's type async over here, and here the first thing we will do is we will show a message called fetching random recipe. So let's type show message. We have already created this function, and the first argument is the message. So let's type fetching a random recipe, and the next argument is that we need to tell it whether it is an error. So let's type false over here, and it is loading state. So let's type true over here. So this is the show message function. So it will have different styling based on whether it is error or loading. And the next thing we need to do is we need to remove everything that we have inside this results grid. So let's type results grid dot inner HTML equals blank. Right, now let's go ahead and use a try catch block, and in the catch we'll just go ahead and type show message, and here let's type failed to fetch a random recipe. Please check your connection and try again. And this is an error, so for the second argument let's type true. Now here in this try block, let's go ahead and first of all type const, and let's call it response equals, and let's type await fetch, and we need to call this API called random API URL. So let's type that over here, and now we need to check whether the response is okay. So let's type if exclamation response dot okay. So if the response is not okay, then we'll just throw a new error, and here let's type something went wrong. Right, now if the response is okay, then we'll just go ahead and get the data. So let's type const data equals await response.json. So we'll just get the JSON data from here. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to clear the message that we are adding over here. we are displaying this message called fetching a random recipe. So let's clear the message. So we already created a function for clearing the message. And now let's go ahead and check whether we have the meals. So let's type if data dot meals. So in the data we'll get an array called meals, and if the length is greater than 0, so let's type data dot meals dot length is greater than 0. Then we'll just go ahead and call the function called display recipe. So we already created this function over here. So let's call this function with the recipes as an argument. So let's type display recipes, and let's pass the data.meals over here. Right now let's add an else, and here let's type show message, and let's type could not fetch a random recipe, please try again. And we'll just set the second argument to true because it's an error. Right now let's go back to our website and let's see whether it works. So right now we can see that there is nothing displayed over here inside the results grid. Now let's click on get a random recipe, and now we can see that a random recipe is displayed over here. If I click on it once again, we have another random recipe displayed over here. So it is working alright. And if I search for something over here, we can see that the results grid is updated with the search results. And if I click on get random, we are getting a random recipe. Now while we are here, let's also simply go ahead and add the functionality to display the model. We'll fetch the details in the next video, but for now we'll just go ahead and display the model when we click on these recipe items inside the results grid. So for that, let's go ahead and reference the model. So here we can see inside our HTML file we have this division with the class of model container, and we also have an ID of recipe model. So we need to first of all reference this, and then we need to also reference the model content. So here we can see that we have this division with an ID of recipe details content. We also need to reference this, and then we also need to reference this close button so that we have the option of closing the model. So let's reference these three elements: the recipe model, the model close button, and recipe details content. So here let's go ahead and type const model equals document dot get element by ID, and let's type recipe model, and then let's type const model content equals document dot get element by ID. Let's type recipe details content, and then lastly let's type const model close button equals document dot get element by ID model close btn. Right now let's create two functions for displaying and hiding the models. So let's type function show model. Now here we need to simply remove the class hidden from this model. So right now we can see that we have this class of hidden, and if I remove that, then the model will be displayed. So here let's type model dot class list dot remove hidden, and we also will disable the option of scrolling in the background. So let's type document dot body dot style dot overflow equals hidden, and let's create a function for closing the model. So let's type function close model, and here let's type model dot class list dot add hidden, and we need to re-enable the scrolling. So let's type document dot body dot style dot overflow equals blank. Now we need to display this model when we click on this results grid item over here. So if you go to the HTML file, here we can see that we have this division with a class of recipe item, and if you go to the main.js file, here we can see that we have the results grid over here, and in that we have all these divisions for the recipe items. So let's go ahead and add an event listener to this results grid, and here we'll just type results grid dot add event listener. Let's listen for the click event, and for the event we get some data, so I'll just call it e, and here let's create a const called card, and let's set it equal to e dot target dot closest, and let's type dot recipe item. So when we click on any of these recipe items over here, it will create this card. So let's type if we have a card. So if we have any recipe item, then we'll just go ahead and call a function called get recipe details. So let's type get recipe details, Now here we need to pass the recipe ID, but we'll do that in the next video. For now, we'll just go ahead and display the model. Right, so now here let's go ahead and create a function for get recipe details. So let's tap async function get recipe details. Just pass 1 to 3 over here, and here let's type ID, and here we'll just call the function called show model. And now if we click on any of these result recipe item, we can see that the model is being displayed. Now the data is not correct because we are not fetching the correct details, but we have the model being displayed over here. And we also don't have the option of scrolling in the background. Let's reload this and let's search for something. And now we can see that we can scroll over here, but if I click on any of these, the scrolling is disabled. Alright, so now let's go back and let's add the functionality to close the model. So let's tap model close button dot add event listener. Let's listen for the click event, and let's tap close model. We already created this function over here, and when we click outside the model over here, we should be able to close this pop-up. So for that, let's go back and let's add an event listener to the model, which is the main container division. So here we have the model, and if I click over here, then it should close. But we need to check whether the target is the parent, and if you're clicking inside the children, then it should not close. So let me show you how to do that. Let's go ahead and type model dot add event listener. Let's listen for the click event, and let's access the data with the variable e. And here let's check whether e.target is equal to model, and here let's call the function close model. Right, now let's go back and let's search for something over here, and let's click on this one, and we have the model being displayed. If I click on close, it closes, and if I click somewhere outside the model, it closes. But if we click inside the model, it doesn't close. So the model functionality is working all right. Now before getting started with the JavaScript, let's go ahead and add some CSS to add some basic transition to this pop-up. So when we click on this result item, we need to add some basic transition over here. So let's go to our CSS and let's go to the model container, and here let's add a transition, and let's type opacity of 0.3 seconds ease, and let's type visibility of 0 seconds ease and 0 seconds for the delay. So now if you go back and if I click on this result item, we can see that we have this basic transition. It slowly fades into the screen. Let's go over here to the model content, and here also we will add a transition. So let's type transition of transform 0.3 seconds ease, and here when the model is displayed, let's set the transform scale to 1, and here let's add one more selector. Let's type model container dot hidden. So when it is hidden, then we will add this style to the model content. So here let's type transform scale of 0.95. So now if we go back and if I click on this result item, we can see that we have this basic animation. Now when we close this also, we will have the smooth transition. So for that, let's go back, and here for the model container hidden, let's add a transition, and let's tap opacity 0.3 seconds ease, visibility 0 seconds ease, and for the delay let's tap 0.3 seconds, and we also have the backdrop over here. So let's tap backdrop filter, and let's set it to 0.3 seconds ease, and here let's tap backdrop filter, and let's set the blur value to 0. So now if you go back and if I click on the close button, we have the smooth transition over here as well. Right, now let's go ahead and start adding the details over here inside this pop-up. Now this is the website of the TheMealDB API, and if I go to API and if you scroll down, we have an endpoint for lookup full meal details by ID. So let's get this, let's copy this, let's go back to our JavaScript file, and here let's add one more constant, and let's call it lookup API URL, and let's set it equal to https : and paste the value over here. Now we'll just remove the ID from here, and we will add it dynamically using JavaScript. Now let's scroll down and go to the event listener for this item right here. So when we click on this, we are firing this event. So let's take a look at the event listener. Let's scroll down, and here we can see for the results grid we are adding this event listener. And if we have a card, then we are just calling this function called get recipe details, and we are passing the ID over here. And now we need to pass the original ID. So for that we need to get the ID somehow and add it to this HTML. So if we go back to our inspector, and let's take a look at the data that we get from the API. So here I'll just console.log the data, and let's go ahead and click on get random recipe, and here we have the data, and let's open this. Inside the meals we have the first array item, and in that we have the meal ID. So this is what we need, the ID meal. So let's go back to our code, and let's see where we are generating the HTML. So we are generating the HTML over here. So we are creating a div with the class of recipe item. Now let's also add a data attribute over here with the ID. So for that we can just go ahead and type recipe div, which is what we are creating, and let's type dot dataset dot ID equals, and let's set it equal to recipe dot, and we have this ID meal. So let's type ID meal over here. And now if you go back, and if you click on get random recipe, and now if you go to the elements, and if you take a look at the result, we can see that we also have the data ID over here. So now that we are getting the data ID, we can just pass it to the other function that we have over here. So here inside the event listener, we can just go ahead and retrieve the meal ID from the data attribute. So let's type const recipe ID equals card.dataset.id. So this will get the ID, and we'll just pass it over here. So let's type recipe ID. Right now let's go ahead and start writing this function. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to reference the model content, because if you go over here to the model, here we can see that inside the model container we have this division with the class of model content, and in that we have all this content. Now inside the model content we have the close button, and after that we have this division with an ID of recipe details content. Now all the details will be loaded over here. So let's go ahead and reference this recipe details content. Let's go to the main.js file. Let's see whether we have already referenced it. So here we can see that we have referenced this recipe details content, and we have a typo over here. Let's fix that. We have model content. Now let's scroll down, and here inside this get recipe details function, let's go ahead and type model content dot inner HTML, and let's set it equal to a paragraph, and let's type loading details, and let's close the paragraph, and let's also add class of message and loading. Now let's go ahead and delete all the content that we have over here inside the recipe details content. For now I'll just go ahead and comment everything. So now let's go ahead and search for something. I'll just type carrot, and let's click on this, and now we can see it says loading details. Right now let's go ahead and use a try catch block. So here after the show model function call, let's type try catch, and inside the catch let's go ahead and type model content dot inner HTML equals, and let's create a paragraph. Let's add a class of message and error, and let's close the paragraph over here, and here let's type failed to load recipe details, check your connection, and or try again. Now here in this try, first of all let's use the fetch API to go to the API URL. So let's type const response equals await fetch, and we have already created this lookup API URL constant. So let's copy this, and let's go ahead and paste it over here inside backticks. So just type $symbol curly braces, and at the end we also need to append the ID. So we are getting the ID over here from this function call. So let's pass the ID over here as well. So let's type $symbol curly braces ID, and here let's go ahead and check if we have the valid response. So let's type if exclamation response.ok, then we'll just throw a new error, and let's type failed to fetch recipe details. Right now if we have the details, then we'll just go ahead and type const data equals await, and we'll type response .json. So we'll just convert it into JSON. Right now, let's go ahead and console.log the data. So let's tab details, data. So now let's go back and let's search for something. Let's click on search. And now let's go to the console and let's click on one of these. So let's click on carrot cake. And we have the details over here. So if I open this, we have the meals, and that we have all the details of the recipe. So here we can see we have the ID, the name, the category, and we have the ingredients. Then we have the measure. Then we have the instructions over here. We have the source, the tags, and the YouTube link. So we can append all of this inside our details pop-up. So what we can do is we can create a new function for that. So here I'll just go ahead and type if data dot meals ampersand data dot meals dot length is greater than 0. So if we have at least one item inside the meals array, then we'll just go ahead and call the function called display recipe details, and we'll just pass the data dot meals and the first item in the array. Or else we'll just go ahead and type model content dot inner HTML equals, and let's create a paragraph, and let's give it a class of message and error. And here let's type could not load recipe details. Right now, let's create this function called display recipe details. So here I just have function display recipe details, and here we also pass this meals. So I just call it recipe over here. Now if we take a look at the result that we get, we can see that we have ingredients over here, and we have 20 of them, and we have measure of 20 of them. Now we need to integrate these measure and the ingredients into a single list item. So for that, let's go ahead and create a const called ingredients, and it will be an array. And let's create a for loop to loop through the 20 ingredients. So let's type for let I equals 1, I is less than or equal to 20, I plus plus. Now here we'll create a const called ingredient, and let's set it equal to recipe that we get over here. And in that we get, so I'll just open this. So here we get str ingredient and the number 1 through 20. So let's type backticks str ingredient $symbol curly braces. Let's type I because it loops from 1 through 20. And here we'll just go ahead and if we have it, we'll just trim it so that we have no extra spaces. Let's also get the measure. So let's type const measure equals recipe, and here let's type str measure and 1 through 20. So let's type str measure and $symbol curly braces I, and here let's type trim. Now let's check whether we have an ingredient. So let's type if ingredient, then we'll just go ahead and push some data to the ingredients array. So I'll just type ingredients dot push, and here we'll just push a list item, and in here let's type $symbol curly braces measure. So if we have the measure, then we'll just go ahead and display the measure, or else we'll just display blank. And after that, let's type $symbol curly braces ingredient. So what we are doing over here is that we are getting the measure and displaying it over here on the left side. And after that, we just have a space, and then we display the ingredient. All right, now let's add an else. And if there are no ingredients, then we'll just go ahead and break from this loop. So this will store the list item with the measure and the ingredient inside this ingredients array. Right now, let's go ahead and create the HTML structure. So let's type const. Now here in this model, let's see what are the things that we need to have. So we need to have this category s3. So let's create a const called category HTML equals. So let's go back to our details. So let's search for something over here, and let's go to the details. And here we can see that we have str category for the category. So let's go ahead and type recipe dot str category, and if we have it, we'll just create an s3, and let's type category $symbol curly braces recipe str category, and let's close the S3 over here. And if you don't have the category, then I will just go ahead and display blank. Let me go over here and I'll just open this link. So now we can see that the next thing we need to have is the str area. So let's go ahead and create a const. Let's type area HTML equals recipe.str area. If we have it, then we'll just create an S3. Let's type area. Let's type $symbol curly braces recipe str area, and let's close the S3. And if you don't have it, we'll just leave it blank, and then we'll display the ingredients. So let's type const ingredients HTML equals ingredients dot length. Now ingredients is basically this array that we created over here, and we are storing all these list items inside here. So here let's type, if we have at least one ingredient, then we'll just go ahead and create an S3. Let's type ingredients, and let's close the S3. Let's create a UL, and inside the UL we need to add the ingredients list items. So here let's go ahead and type $symbol curly braces, and let's type ingredients dot join blank. So this will add all the list items inside the UL, and if you don't have it, then we'll just go ahead and display blank. Right now we have the instructions. So let's type const instructions HTML equals, let's create an S3. Let's type instructions. Let's close the S3, and let's create a paragraph. Let's type $symbol curly braces. Let's close the paragraph, and here let's see whether we have str instructions. So let's type recipe.str instructions. If we have it, then we'll just go ahead and type recipe.str instructions, and here we'll use a replace function. And here we can see that we have this /r/n. So when we have this, we'll just go ahead and use a br tag. So br tag is basically a line break. So for that you have to type /r $n/g, and let's type br over here. So it will replace all of these rn with a line break tag. Now if you don't have any instructions, we'll just go ahead and type instructions not available. Right now let's go ahead and get the YouTube link. So let's type const YouTube HTML equals recipe, and it is called str YouTube. And if you have it, then we'll just go ahead and create an S3. Let's type video recipe S3. Let's create a div, and here we can see that we have created this class of video wrapper. So let's add that over here, div with the class of video wrapper, and let's create an anchor tag. And in the href, we'll just go ahead and type $symbol curly braces recipe.str YouTube, and let's type target equals underscore blank. So this will open it in a new tab, and here let's type watch on YouTube, and let's close the a tag. Let's close the div, and if you don't have the YouTube link, we'll just display blank. Right now let's create a const for the source HTML. So let's type source HTML equals recipe, and it is called str source. So let's type str source, and if we have it, we'll just go ahead and create a div with a class of source wrapper. So let's type div class of source wrapper. Let's close the div over here, and here we need to add the anchor tag. So let's type a href equals $symbol curly braces recipe.src.str source. Let's type target equals underscore blank, and let's type view original source over here. Let's close the anchor tag over here, and if you don't have it, we'll just go ahead and display blank. Right now let's add all of this to the model content. So here we have the model content. So let's add all of this. So let's type model content dot inner HTML equals backticks. First of all, we need to add this h2 with the name. So let's type h2, and here let's type $symbol curly braces recipe, and it is called str meal. So let's type str meal, and after that we have the image. So I'll just add this inside a new line. So here we need to have an img tag, and in the source we'll just type $symbol curly braces recipe dot And here let's see what is the key. So here we can see we have str meal thumb. So let's add that over here. And for the alt, let's go ahead and add the title. So let's type recipe.str meal. And then we have the category. So let's type $, curly braces, category HTML. And then we need to have area HTML. Then we need to have ingredients HTML. And then we need to have instructions HTML. Then we need to have YouTube HTML. And then lastly we need to have source HTML. So now let's see whether this works. Let's go back and let's search for something over here. And let's click on this. And we have the details displayed over here. So here we have the ingredients, we have the area, we have the category. Let's see whether we have the correct details. So we can see that the area is Canadian. So everything is correct. And we also have the links over here. So that's how you can get the details of each of these recipes. And with that, we have completed creating our recipe finder app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So here I have logged into my Blogger dashboard, and let's add this to a new post. So let's click on new post. And here let's type recipe finder. And here first of all you need to change this into the HTML view. So change it from the compass view to the HTML view. Now here you'll be able to add your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. So first of all let's add the CSS. I'll just create a style tag. And let's go to our source code, and I will leave the link of the source code in the description of this video. And we can just delete all this commented code from here. I'll just delete this as well. Alright, let's go to the style.css file, and let's copy everything from here. So we need to copy the root, and we'll just skip this asterisk from here because it will affect the whole page. And we'll also skip the styling of the body. So I'll just copy this and paste it over here. And let's go back and copy everything from here till the end. And let's paste it over here. Alright, now let's go and copy and paste this font family and line height. And let's add it to the main container division, which is this one right here. And let's also copy and paste this color from here. And now let's go ahead and paste the HTML. So I'll just create some space over here. Let's go back to our source code. Let's go to the HTML file, and first of all we need to copy the link of the font. So I'll just copy this and I'll just paste it over here. Right now let's go ahead and copy everything inside the body, and let's paste it over here. Now let's create a script tag, and we will add the JavaScript inside here. So let's go to the main.js file. Let's copy everything from here, and let's paste it right here. Right now if you go to the HTML file, here we can see that we have this basic heading and these things over here. So you can make changes in here. So you can change the heading and the placeholder and all those things over here. And here we have the styling, and then we have the functionality. And for this application we are using this API called TheMealDB. So let's go back and let's click on publish. Let's see how it looks. Let's click on confirm. And here we have the recipe finder. Let's click on view. And here we have this recipe finder application. Let's click on this get random recipe button, and let's see whether it works. So here we can see that we have a recipe, and we can open this and see all the details. We also have the link for the YouTube video and also the original source. Right now let's search for something, and let's see whether it works. So let's click on search, and we can see that all the search results are displayed over here. Let's open one of these, and the model is also working. So that's basically how you can add this recipe finder to your Blogger website. Alright, so that's basically it for this video. I will leave the link of the source code in the description of this video, and if you have any doubts you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.